Right, it's 7:40, so I think we should make a start.
Yeah.
So I'm sure most of you know Simon, but I should introduce him anyway. He's a friend from Shropshire Humanists who's joining us tonight to give us a talk on how to talk about humanism, I believe. So can we, if while Simon is speaking, can we all mute? And do you want people to save up questions, Simon, or put questions in the chat?
I save up questions for the end, because usually if somebody asks a question, it's what I'm going to be talking about next. They're just a bit ahead. So yeah, mute yourselves now. And I'm going to ask you some questions initially while I've got you all up there. Do any of you give talks on humanism? If you do, raise your hand. Okay. Are any of you school visitors? Okay. Any of you trained in dialogue or do interfaith dialogue either? You do interfaith dialogue, okay. And pastoral care? Yeah, okay. Celebrants? Okay, yes, of course, Victoria. Okay, so that's quite interesting. Okay, so let me go to my screen, which is that, and that. And why isn't, let me get rid of, close that up a bit, move that up, and click the little bit there. Good. Okay, so let me just get that done. So I'm going to be talking about humanism. And over the last few years, I've seemed to have done quite a lot with public talks and talking to sacres and faith groups and interfaith groups and so on. Now, my namesake, Florence Nightingale, wrote a book with a wonderful title. It was called Notes on Nursing, What It Is and What It Is Not. I rather like that. So I'm going to start by saying what I'm not going to talk about. And I'm not going to talk about telling children, pupils at school about humanism. It's probably the single most important thing we can do is go into schools. And if you want to train, it's a very good training and it's free. I'm not going to talk specifically about dialogue with faith and interfaith groups. It's a very interesting area. Jeremy and I are running courses now through Humanist UK for training people in doing this. It's actually a very good course, and it's great fun as well. And that is free as well. I'm not going to be talking about how we present humanism in the context of pastoral care. That also has a very good training course, and that is free. I'm not going to talk about it as a celebrant. That has very good training courses, extremely good, but those actually aren't free. I guess because when you're a celebrant, you actually get a fee for the jobs, whereas the other jobs are usually volunteer. Okay, so my kids say to me, is humanism a thing, Dad? I'm not quite sure what they mean. And then they say, is humanism a religion? So I think you need to get the sort of terminology right. Humanism is a worldview. Now, worldviews come in two sorts, religious and non-religious. So the religious column, you recognize all those. The non-religious, I guess the only one of any note now is humanism. But actually it's not a black and white. There are quite a few things sort of in the middle, because quite a few religions have non-theist equivalents. So for example, there are some Quakers who don't believe in God. There are of course many Jews who consider themselves to be racially Jewish or culturally Jewish, but don't believe the Jewish religion at all. You don't have that distinction in Islam. There aren't many people who say they're purely culturally Islam and don't believe because of the consequences within their community or sometimes their country. Now, what does it mean, a worldview? Now, this is actually quite important because in the 2010 Equality Act, there are 7 protected characteristics, of which belief and worldview is one. So you need to know what defines it. You don't have to read all this, but basically it has to be a belief that is genuine. It can't just be something like, I believe in Brexit. It can't be something that's a category 2. And it has to be a weighty, substantial aspect of human life and behavior. So it can't be a Jedi Knight or something like that. And similarly, a certain level of cogency, seriousness, cohesion, and importance. And it has to be something that's relatively decent. So if you think about it, that really excludes atheism. That's not a worldview, nor is agnosticism, nor would something political like liberalism or vegetarianism. Although they have tried to make out that veganism is a worldview, but I don't feel it fills those criteria, and I don't think it should be considered that one either. So when is a worldview religious as opposed to non-religious? Well, usually it involves, well, the first thing to say is that there is actually no single defining criteria for what is religious and what isn't. It's more of a sort of Wittgenstein family resemblance. So religions tend to have one or more of the following. Obviously, belief in God or gods, and if, with pantheism, there are literally hundreds of thousands of gods. Belief in heaven and hell and purgatory and limbo, Bible, Quran, and so on. Sources of rules and doctrines that are sometimes literally carved in stone. Prescribed patterns of worship, founding figures, usually male, Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, and authority, priests, imams, popes, usually male. And the cynics say that they think that religions were invented by men for men, maybe. Okay, so worldviews. Technically, you should refer to religious and non-religious worldviews, and that is what it should say in the sort of literature on sacres and so on. But people often shorten this to religion and worldviews. In other words, religions and humanism. Although technically, of course, religion is a worldview. And some people just put religion and beliefs as a sort of shorthand. But technically, you should be saying religious and non-religious worldviews. Okay, so who's religious and who isn't? Now, sociologists have 4 criteria here. And the first is loose cultural affiliation. And in this sense, I'm a Christian. In a sort of John Betjeman sort of way. I love churches, I love church music, I love, all the sort of pageantry with it. But I wouldn't call myself a Christian, and I don't think loose cultural affiliation really means nothing. And then, of course, I don't feel that I actually belong to a faith like the Christian faith. Nor do I believe in, the virgin birth, the miracles, let alone God and the divinity of Jesus. Nor do I actually practice as a Christian by going to church and things like that. So when you're deciding whether somebody is religious, in surveys and so on, you have to consider belonging, believing, and behaving, the 3 Bs, to form a picture of whether that person is religious or not. And now you'll know these figures. Over 53% of the population say they live without religion. Okay. If you say to them, are you Muslim, Hindu, or Church of England? They'll say, oh, I'm Church of England. But if you say, are you Muslim, Hindu, Church of England, or have no religion? They say, I have no religion. And among young people, it's 72%. And of course, they will be the adults of tomorrow. Now, what's particularly interesting is that of those who say, I am a Christian, I belong to the Christian church, less than half of them believe that Jesus was a real person who died, came back to life, and was the Son of God. And those are the sine qua non of Christian beliefs. You have to believe that he was the Son of God. The resurrection is crucial. Many Christians don't worry too much about the miracles or the virgin birth, but the others. So it's reasonable to say that half the people who call themselves Christians are probably cultural Christians. And then, of course, those who say they live without religion, a large proportion of them hold basic humanist beliefs. If you say to them, what do you believe? They say, I don't believe anything. I guess I'm an atheist. But if you question them what they believe, their beliefs are mostly humanist. although many of them never heard of humanism. So if you look at a tendency to religion within the community, religiosity, like all biological variables, it's normally distributed. Most people, sort of middle level of religiosity, some very religious, other people, the lower end, myself probably a skeptic and so on, not religious. Now, when you've got a variation like this, there can only be two causes. One is it's in our genes, it's in our inheritance, it's nature, or it's the effect of our environment, it's nurture, or it's both. And what's interesting is that we have a natural experiment, which is twins. So if you measure religiosity, and there are various validated scores for this, and you look at identical twins and how similar they are, concordance, and you look at non-identical twins and look at how similar they are, the concordance is much greater in identical twins. And that is a measure of the inherited variation in the religiosity you find in the population. And it comes out about 40%, which is similar to the genetic contribution to happiness and empathy, but much less than intelligence. About 85% of the variation in intelligence is genetic. Now this is let me just explain a little bit. Before the Industrial Revolution, people tended to grow up with their parents, so they had their own genetic endowment of religiosity, but they did on the whole what their parents did. And as they stayed and lived in the same village or nearby in the same town, they continued, a lot of social pressures to continue as they were as a child. But after the Industrial Revolution, children tended to move away from home. Not soon enough in some cases. Anyway, but basically this is what happens now. So the column on the left is if both your parents are religious. If both your parents are religious, you have a 50% chance of being religious. This is a statistical estimation. If one parent is religious, it's 25%. And if neither are religious, your chance of being religious is very small indeed. So the idea that belonging is believing is not the case. And in fact, the fall off in religion throughout the population is generational. This is over 30 years. The no religions at the top, purple, Church of England at the bottom. You'll see Church of England has fallen. And in fact, since then, it has fallen even further. The proportion of the population that are Church of England is only 14, 1-4, and among young people, it's between 2 or 3%. So the Church of England are few and far between now, and yet they have an inordinate presence in our communities and government. Okay, so those are the sort of basic figures of proportion of people Church of England and non-religious. And this is from a survey 2 years ago. Now, that is sort of setting the scene about what humanism is, because I want to do that because if we're going to talk about humanism, we have to have a clear idea in our mind of what we mean by worldviews, what we mean by religion, how common it is, and so on. So when you're talking about humanism, it depends firstly on how long you have to talk about it, who you're going to talk to, and why you're talking to them. Okay. So the first one, how long do you have? Now, I do quite a lot on the radio. I think every humanist partnership group should have somebody who's prepared to go on the radio, and they should tell the producers on the local radio that they're prepared to do it. It's not actually that difficult. You can sort of practice it. It's either recorded or live. Recorded in some ways is easier, less frightening in a way. But the problem is that they tend to chop what you've done into bits, and they may cut out your killer punchline. So if you are doing it recorded, speak to the producer of the program and find out what they want you to talk about, the sort of basis of it, and roughly for how long. But they like you to do it live. It's much more sort of spontaneous and fun. The trouble with when it's live is that you start talking, and before you can come out with your killer punchline, they say, "Thank you, Dr. Nightingale, and now for the football results." And you've lost it. So when you're talking on the radio, you have to get your message in really quite soon. Of course, then you can go and discuss other nuances about it later. In fact, often you leave little bits open to encourage them to ask you, but you really got to say your bit at the beginning. If you're advertising a talk you're doing, you must say in that early bit, and it's on this date at this time, and if you want to come, contact me, this is my email address, and you say to the producer, not the producer, the presenter there, the person in the studio with you, you say, and could you repeat that later in the program? And of course he has to, because you've asked him to. So if somebody said to me, well, what is this humanism thing? What I used to say, oh, firstly, don't come up with something negative, and particularly anti-religious. It really sets a bad tone, okay? These may be true, but they're not a good way to start. So this is the classic soundbite that I used to use. I'd say humanists believe that you can lead a good life and be a good person without religion. And then sometimes I'd add, of course, that begs many questions, doesn't it? We say we believe this, but what evidence do we have for it? And we say we can lead a good life. What does it mean to lead a good life? And this, of course, takes you back to Aristotle and eudaimonia. And you say you can be a good person, but how do humanists know what is good and bad, right and wrong without a Bible? And you say you live without religion. Well, isn't humanism just another religion? Of course, we've dealt with that already. And then, even if that's true, what do humanists actually do? So, for example, when I'm talking in schools, this is quite a good start, because then you can discuss each of those things. You encourage them to question the original statement and ask questions about it. But then I stopped using this, because basically, if you think about it, it's defining us as not religious. And that's not a very satisfactory way of defining humanism. We should define humanism on its merits, not in comparison to something else. I mean, if there wasn't religion, would there be no humanists? So I've changed slightly, and I now accentuate the positive, which was the subject of the last talk I gave you. Okay, I would say something like this. Humanists believe the world is best understood by natural laws and forces, which is the philosophical position of naturalism. Of course, implicit is rather than the supernatural or superstition, which you can say if you want. Then we humanists believe we can work out what's right and wrong and good and bad ourselves. And implicit is without the need for sacred texts or priests to interpret them. Humanists believe the meaning of life can be found in the way we lead our lives, rather than finding it in something or someone out there somewhere. Okay. But I'm not sure this is entirely right either. And I've changed, because I don't like humanists believe. And I've changed to saying, as a humanist, I believe. And in fact, Jeremy Riddell encouraged me to do this. First, if you say humanists believe, it's slightly, we have a catechism. You have to believe this, you have to sign up for these things. Whereas as a humanist, I believe, sort of means the same, but actually gives a much more personal view. This is what I believe as a humanist. And I think it comes across better. We could talk about that later. Now, if you feel they're going to interrupt you and you really have something to say and it's a bit long, you can do what the politicians do on the Today programme. Now, I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to have to read this. So basically, you don't stop at the end of a sentence, because that's when they say, thank you, Dr. Nightingale, we'll now have the football results. You say, you see, we live in a vibrant, plural society with different cultures, different ethnicities and different religions, differences that can sometimes be a great source of friction if the communities are isolated. Do we really want schools that increase, you see what I mean? So the politicians do this all the time, and it's actually very difficult to interrupt them. Okay. So I was talking about radio and just talking for a few seconds, and it really is worth thinking very clearly how you're going to start off. And do talk to the producer beforehand. They're very happy to talk to you. They want it to go well. And the producer will be the one who asks you back on. So it's worth thinking about. So what about just a minute or so? Well, I was asked by a multi-faith panel with these people as well to talk about our religions. And we had to start with a 2-minute account of our religion. And they timed us. We weren't allowed to go over. And all the others sort of winged it and said, well, you know, Christianity is about being nice and kind and worshipping Jesus and, you know, and things like that. And they all sounded a bit similar and very vague. So I wrote mine out. And I'm going to read this to you. And it sort of sums it up. And also, I had this on a sheet, which all the students, all the pupils had, and at the bottom some details about the Humanist Association and so on. And I'm sure it turned up in some of their essays because it's nice and short and easy to copy from. So I said, 2 minutes. In a nutshell, as a humanist, I believe we can lead a good life and be a good person using reason, evidence, and compassion. As a humanist, I don't have a book of rules or sacred texts like the Christian Bible or the Muslim Quran. I acquire knowledge from studying the way we are and the world around us. That means I believe in evolution rather than creationism, science rather than mystery, reason rather than superstition, understanding rather than prejudice. As a humanist, I believe that human morality, knowing right from wrong, comes from us, not from some ultimate source of truth out there that we have to discover. Morality is partly something we're all born with and partly something we work out for ourselves. That's called normative ethics and has been around since the ancient Greeks. I feel that a moral philosophy based on knowledge and reason is better than a theology based on divine revelation or a holy book written hundreds or thousands of years ago and priests to interpret those books for us. Having said all that, the values we arrive at from humanism are actually not so different from the values of most moderate religions. We value compassion and fairness and respect and so on. Although we live without religion, we are not against religion. And in fact, humanists fight for the rights of everyone to live the lives they want and to believe what they want. We have a sense of awe and wonder about the incredible world around us. But as we only have the one life, we believe it's important to live well and to help other people to live well. Recent surveys have shown that over half the population of the UK live without religion. And although most do not call themselves humanist, the majority believe what humanists believe. And among school leavers, it's 72% that live without religion. And that's why teaching humanism alongside other worldviews in RE lessons is important, because linking being good to belief in God is not much help for the majority of you who will leave school without religion. So that's 2 minutes, and it covers most bases. That was describing humanism in 2 minutes. Okay. Now, for the last 12 years, I've done a sort of thought for the day, but it's called Pause for Thought on Radio Shropshire. And you should try and get onto your local religious affairs program as well. And if you write some specimen scripts, and you can pinch some of mine if you like, and they look at them, they'll say, oh, this actually looks quite interesting and isn't going to offend anybody who's religious. So when I started doing this, I sent my scripts in to the producer, and she said, this is terrible. You're lecturing to medical students. You're saying, there are 3 things I need to tell you. First, she said, you've got to imagine you're talking to a little old lady sitting on bread at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning drinking her tea. So you have a hook, you have a story, a little personal anecdote that brings them in, okay? Then you sort of develop the theme in a sort of anecdotal way. Maybe you have some humanist quotation, and then a sort of so what? What does this all mean to us? And then at the end, there might be some sort of call to arms, such as, it makes you think, maybe we should all do such and such, or think such and such. Of course, the religious thought for the day usually ends with a prayer. I have about 30 programs, which I've got the scripts for, and actually I've recorded them as well. And if anybody wants to pinch them and adapt them, I'm very happy to do this. And you could go to your local program and offer some of the scripts. And I think they'd be quite interested. Okay, so if you're doing a longer lecture, the longest thing I ever did was, this is my brother, who some of you have met, the Reverend John Nightingale. He's in Birmingham, and he's been to some of your meetings. And the BBC Listening Project heard that we had rather interesting lives. We both started off very devout Christians. I was going to follow him into the church, and I saw the light, as it were. It's an interesting story in itself. Ask me later if you want. And I went off and became a doctor, and he went off to become a clergyman. I was an atheist. And then later, I became a humanist and interested in religion, and I do a lot of dialogue work, and of course I do ceremonies. And he became interested in science, and particularly neuroscience, which of course I'm a neurologist. He started going to neuroscience talks and so on. So we've sort of separated and converged. And anyway, we sat down in the studio, and they gave us a microphone, and we said, well, how long do we talk for? And they said, oh, as long as you like. They had to stop us after 1 hour, 40 minutes. And of course, all of that then goes to the British Library, or the whole talk is in, anybody can go and listen to it on the British Library. Anybody can pinch a bit of it. And occasionally the BBC puts 2 or 3 minutes of our talk on the radio. They don't tell me they're going to do it. Somebody rings me up and says, oh, I heard you and John on Radio 4. Now, I want to talk a little bit about doing courses. Sarah, do you do a humanism course? Have you done them in the past?
We haven't, well, not during my involvement anyway. It's something we've talked about and we'd like to do. It's
okay. So we started this about 4 or 5 years ago, and we based ours on the Manchester course, which was quite good, and it was a tremendous success. So each week they had some reading to do, and then they came around to my house. There were about between 12 and 20 people, and we discussed stuff, and people enjoyed it so much that at the end of the course they said, can we go on meeting and discussing? So we started our non-fiction book club, which has continued since then, and more people join it. But actually last year what we did was something slightly different. We did the Introducing Humanism online course. It is extremely good. There's also Humanist Lives. Humanist Lives is a little different. It's more personal, people's personal perspectives. The Introducing Humanism is slightly more philosophical, but pretty light philosophy. You don't need to know any before you do it. They both cover similar grounds. But so the Introducing Humanism is very good. Now, I know this course backwards because I've done it now, about 6 or 7 times each of them, because I'm the mentor for them. So every time they alternate 6 weeks, 6 weeks. And I go on them every day to see what posts people have done and sort of answer questions and so on. So I know them very well. But last year we did one. Everybody watched the videos and read the things for a week, and then they came to my house, we discussed it, and it was really great fun. And it's actually very easy to do. You have to find out when it's coming on, and then it's free, and people sign up for it, and then you can do a Zoom session just talking about that week, and it's a good way to meet people. And I'll say this as well, the people who went on the course have become very solid members. In fact, most of our committee are people who went on that course. They become much more interested in humanism, much more active, less passive. Now, when you're talking about humanism, it does depend who you're talking to and why you're talking. So why would one talk about humanism? Now, these are some possible reasons to inform humanists. I guess that's why I'm talking to you, coming up with some of my sort of experiences, anecdotes, and sort of general thoughts. To convert the faithful, to convert the non-religious, to inform the faithful, to disabuse the faithful of the many myths they have, and to promote humanist campaigns. Well, I think you'd all probably say yes, except we're not in the business of proselytizing. We're not in the business of converting the faithful. Firstly, it's a waste of time because they do not respond to evidence and reason. In fact, the more evidence and reason we give them, the greater their faith is, the greater it has to be. So don't bother. And anyway, I think it puts us in a bad light, because I think most of us accept that if somebody is happy in their faith and they feel it makes them better and happier, leave them be. So informed humanism. What about converting the non-religious? Well, I'm not sure about converting, but I certainly feel the non-religious people we should lay our wares out, as it were, and say, this is what humanism is. And most of them, when they look at it, they say, oh, and you've heard this so many times, oh, I think I must have always been a humanist. And, you know, that's a very common trope. To inform the faithful, yes. To disabuse the faithful of the many myths, absolutely. And I think to promote humanist campaigns, which is, I think, why many of us joined the humanist group. My kids say to me, Dad, why do I have to be a humanist? You brought me up to lead a good life and be a good person. Why do I have to join anything? And I say, you don't. That's absolutely fine. But you may think the world could be better, and it's difficult to change things on your own. So meet with other like-minded people, whether it's Amnesty International, Global Justice Now, a political party, Greenpeace, or the Humanists, if you like their campaigns, and that's how you change things. So that, I guess, is why I joined the Humanists originally, because of their campaigns. What do you tell your family? Well, I've got 4 kids, and when they're in their teens, I tried to explain a bit about humanism and about the philosophical position of naturalism, and they got completely the wrong end of the stick and muddled up naturalism with naturism. And they were absolutely horrified about the prospects of nudist camp family holidays. But in fact, there is no nudity in humanism, at least in Shropshire. I don't know what you Birmingham guys get up to. And then, when I said I was becoming a humanist, they were really worried. They said, Dad, it's a cult. It's a cult. They said, Dad, they'll take all your money, they'll break up your marriage, they'll give you drugs, and then, of course, there are all the rituals and orgies. Don't worry, Dad. We'll rescue you and deprogram you from the humanist cult. But I'm afraid, again, we're a bit short on orgies in Shropshire. Okay, so going back to how long you talk, the standard one is an hour. So talking to humanists. Are humanists all much the same? Well, hang on. Well, it sometimes seems that way, but I think there is one big division among humanists, and that is that some came from religion, and they tend to be a bit angry. Others grew up in secular households and just naturally morphed into humanists. And I was the first. Here I am, having lost my faith, a very angry atheist. Everybody had long hair in the 60s. You're all too young to remember. And I used to go around telling religious people that everything they thought was important in their lives was a load of rubbish. And these were people who are much nicer and much happier than I was. It's really extremely embarrassing when I look back on it. And to their credit, you know, they said, Simon, have another cup of tea. And we remained friends. And then about 15 years ago, I became a humanist and I changed. My brother, the vicar, said I became a nicer person. My wife disagrees with him. But I came to view religion differently. I came to recognize that religious people saw their faith as making them happier and better people. They saw the same in their families and their communities. I mean, what's not to like? I just felt that as a humanist, I could achieve the same without religion. It's not easy. Now, they don't find it easy always, but it's important, and that's why we try hard. Now, are they normal in other respects? Well, they are a pretty homogenous group. There have been a number of surveys of the humanist community, and these are 50 years apart, is that? 40, yeah. The majority are male, well-educated, often having worked in the professions. Most of them live down south, or at least in cities. They tend to be old and retired, present company accepted, obviously. And this begs many questions about what we should be doing with our members. What do our members want? In fact, I'm talking at the next Gram about how do we find out what our members want. I don't think it matters. I think we provide what our members want. They wouldn't be coming otherwise. The real question is, how do we get other people in? What can we do to bring in other people as well? But I'll be talking about that at Grams. I hope some of you will be coming. Now, at Shrewsbury Shropshire Humanists, I've tried to banish bad language. And this is a phrase my brother used. He wrote a book called Bad Language in Church, which is about the Church of England's sort of sexist language and nationalist language. So I try and discourage cheap jokes, you know, talking about burqas as pillar boxes or nuns as penguins. And I try and stop people making generalization. And in fact, we encourage religious people to come to our meetings. So there's a nice Muslim lady. She's a widow of a local GP, and she comes wearing hijab. She's a delight, and she's interested in the talks we have. But the fact that she's sitting there near the front stops people from making horrible generalizations about Muslims. Avoid singular identities. You know, just defining somebody by their religion isn't right. I am a humanist. I guess that is one of my identities. There's only one. It doesn't define me. I'm also a doctor. And I share that identity with people all over the world, of all different sorts. I'm a father and a grandfather. I share that with half the world. I'm English. I'm European. I've given something away about my politics there. So avoid singular identities. Avoid conflating issues. What do I mean by that? If you think about it, you might know somebody who's a Catholic, and then there is their beliefs, which is slightly separate, and then there is the institution of the Catholic Church. So you don't want to conflate each of those. Don't conflate religion with harm. We're not against religion, we're against harm and undue privilege. So, yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to talk about dialogue, but there is plenty of opportunity. In fact, all of these are things which I've done. I'm also actually in a religious book club. The Archdeacon of Shrewsbury asked me to join a book club, and I'm the only non-religious member. It's a very, very interesting book club. We do some really interesting books, although they do sometimes forget. Somebody was talking about prayer, and they all differ a lot. One of them thinks God answers prayers, the other one doesn't. And they said, "What do you think, Simon?" I said, "Well, I've got a problem with that question." "Oh, yes, of course, you don't believe in God. I'm terribly sorry." So it's quite fun with it. Now, Shrewsbury School is just up the road over there. One of the pupils decided to start a humanist club. It is a Christian school. It's a Christian foundation, Church of England, but it's quite light. And in fact, they have quite a few pupils there that have other religions. And so I said, yes, I met with them, and I also discussed it with the teachers. I didn't want to tread on any toes. And we decided on a title for a talk. And I wanted to bring a lot of people. I'm sorry, I've got a nasty cough. And I've lost my sense of smell. No, I haven't. So the title we had was this. Now, I don't know whether you get the reference, but Defense Against the Dark Arts is a big thing in the Harry Potter books. Subtitle, What to Do If Somebody Comes at You with a Bible. And all the RE teachers turned up, which was good. Because actually, what I said to them was, if one of your friends, comes at you with a Bible, smile sweetly, change the subject. Don't argue with them, because if you do, you won't remain friends. So allow people to believe what they want, as long as they don't do any harm, and don't be aggressive towards religion, don't be aggressively defensive. But if somebody says they genuinely want a sort of intellectual, philosophical discussion about religion, then you've got to know your stuff. And I talked to them about the ontological, the cosmological, the teleological arguments, the argument from design, the argument from personal revelation, and we discussed those and when one might use them. I was really trying to impress the teachers as much as the pupils, because it's the teachers who will allow you to come back. In fact, when the boy left, the club folded, which is a great shame. So just sort of a few do's and don'ts when I'm talking about humanism to faith and interfaith groups. And it's trying to get the terminology right, because so much, even wars, are caused by people using the same words to mean different things. What do I mean by belief and faith? Well, the way I use them is this. I say that to believe something is to say an assertion is true. There's usually some evidence, although not necessarily. It's to believe something is a bit sort of neutral in that respect. To have faith in something is to say something is true when there is no or insufficient evidence. And I would say the existence of God, and I would say alternative medicine. Now, people often go, oh, shock horror, he's against alternative medicine. That is the definition of alternative medicine, that there isn't sufficient evidence. Once there's evidence it works, it's no longer alternative. And then, of course, there's blind faith. Now, blind faith is saying something is true when there is evidence to the contrary, like the people who believe the earth is flat or young earth creationists. And then there's a difference between different beliefs and shared values. And it's always good to start with shared values. They like the fact that our values are shared, and it's the single most important thing. And these are just taken some classic Christian sort of little epithets, which I think we'd all agree with. Honor thy father and mother. Now, in two places in the Old Testament, it says, if a child curses their parents, they shall be put to death. It actually says it in two places in the New Testament as well. I told this to my kids, hoping they might improve their behavior, and they said, bugger off, Dad, we're not Christians. So maybe I brought them up all wrong. So start with shared values rather than differences in doctrine. Okay, yes. Why do all religions have shared values? Well, one possibility is that all the gods came to the same conclusion, which is an extraordinary coincidence. Sometimes the interfaith groups will say, well, actually, maybe it's because there's just one God and we're all seeing a bit different. And, you know, we're all seeing, you know, none of us got it quite right. So I say to them, which bit of your belief were you prepared to give up? And they say, well, none of it. So that's a non-starter. But actually, of course, the real reason that we all have shared values is because these values are basic to human nature and were adopted by religion. Okay. In fact, I think the main value of religion in years gone by was not to tell us what to do, because I think most people sort of work that out for themselves. The main benefits of religion was motivation, encouraging people with carrot and stick to do the right thing. Now, we can discuss that later. The difference between discovered truth and revealed truth, an area called epistemology. So, there's a very good video on this on Humanists UK, Stephen Fry. So philosophers say there are sort of two truths. There's axiomatic truth. These are things that have to be true because by definition, you know, a dog is a mammal, is part of the definition of dog. Therefore, it is axiomatically true. And then it's discovered truth, which is the scientific method. And you do need to be able to give a succinct account of the scientific method. But we look around and we see, it's obvious that, you know, this is how we understand the world around us. But some people, they get their truths from two other ways. From sacred texts, which were written a long time ago. And unlike discovered truth, which changes with new evidence, sacred texts don't change much. And whereas with scientific method, constantly criticizing is essential, criticism isn't welcome with sacred texts. Personal revelation is very interesting. I mean, religious people talk about that little unbidden voice that comes to them and calms them and, you know, supports them and informs them. We all get it. we all get these little moments of wonder, these aha moments, these moments of inspiration. But of course, we believe they come from in here, not some ultimate source of truth out there. So revealed truth means we believe in evolution, not creationism, science, mystery, critical thinking, not blind faith, naturalism rather than supernatural, understanding and prejudice. I'm not going to belabor this. You all know the difference between a secular state and a secular society. We do not want a society without religion. We're not seeking that. We just want to get rid of privilege for religion. And of course, a secular state provides not only freedom from religion, but actually provides freedom for religion as well. People use the word respect a lot. And Jeremy Riddell and I disagree a little bit here. I don't like the word respect. I think it's a bit of a rat bag. People use it too much. And I tend to use it in one circumstance only. I say we should respect people's rights. It's a very useful way of using the word respect. We respect people's rights. We are not respecting their beliefs. We respect their rights to have those beliefs. We're not respecting their beliefs. So somebody might be believe in Nazism. Now, they have a right to believe that, but I don't respect their belief. Unfortunately, in the Human Rights Act, coming from the European Convention of Human Rights, there is a section about the right of respect, which slightly muddies the water, but actually what they really mean is the right to privacy. Okay, just a few things to avoid. Avoid saying, oh, it's just this. A rainbow is just refraction of light, because it's an incredible thing, and it makes us seem rather dull and boringly scientific. There's a wonderful book by Dawkins called Unweaving the Rainbow. People accused Newton of unweaving the rainbow by explaining that it was due to a fraction of light. Avoid treading on their cherished beliefs. There's I'll come back to that. There's a lovely poem by Yeats which ends, "I've spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly because you tread on my dreams. So be careful you don't rubbish people's dreams." So why, if somebody says what do I think about creationism? I say, well, I'm not going to talk about creationism. I'm going to talk about people who believe in the world is flat. And there are people. They have conferences. They believe that if you walk far enough, you'll fall off the edge. There are genuinely people who believe. Why? Why would anybody believe that? There aren't many reasons. The first reason is that they're ignorant of the evidence. Now, there was a time when we were all ignorant. We all thought the world was flat. Or they know the evidence. They're not really bright enough to understand it. Or actually, they're deluded. They have some psychiatric disorder which makes them believe something that isn't true. Or they're naive. I've actually seen somebody sawn in half on stage and put together. I'm very interested in magic. I go to magic conventions. I've been to a stage show by Derren Brown called Miracles. He performs miracles on stage. If you believe all that, then you're naive. Or they're not ignorant, stupid, mad, or naive. They're just normal people like you and me who are trying very, very hard to believe something that isn't true, and they're succeeding. Because if you try hard enough, you can believe anything. There's a lovely quote in Alice in Wonderland. The White Queen says something to Alice, and Alice says, "Oh, I can't believe that." And she says, "I dare say you haven't had much practice. When I was your age, I would practice for half an hour a day. Why, sometimes I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast," which I think is a lovely quote. And avoid certainty. Is there a God? How can you be sure there isn't a God? Well, I think God's very unlikely. I don't think the evidence adds up. And you'll probably remember the wonderful humanist bus. There's Dawkins sitting in the doorway, standing in the doorway. There's probably no God. I think that's great. Not there isn't a God. There's probably no God. And of course, the Christian Party, there's their office behind the bus. They're actually a political party, very right-wing, pretty homophobic. And they put, there definitely is a God. So I think from the philosophical position, we're actually on a higher ground than they are. And of course, Dawkins has this scale of belief, and he says he's 6. And I think it's quite good to say that. You say, well, No, I don't think there's a God, but you know, I'm open-minded. If you produce evidence, I'll look at it. Whereas they say, no, there definitely isn't a God, which isn't, yeah, not, okay, less open. Okay, how am I doing for time? Can I just carry on? Okay, so common questions that people with faith ask: how do you know what's right and wrong, or good or bad? And then they say, and anyway, if you can work it out, why do you choose to do the right thing? Which is interesting, because it implies they do the right thing because of some advantage. The other two questions are, you know, without religious spirituality, isn't life very dull? And also, you know, we have no meaning to our life. So I'm just going to consider this, but you do need short, clear answers to the others. Ask me again. So sources of humanist morality, and this is going to be a whirlwind tour. There are sort of three sources. We were talking earlier about this book by John Haidt, who talks about moral foundation theory. We actually are born with moral values. Animals have them. Animals have virtually no culture apart from a few primates. So all their behavior is biologically, genetically determined. And animals show compassion and fairness, respect for authority, pecking order, in-group loyalty, and taboos. Then, of course, there's positive psychology, which has shown that all cultures agree about what are virtues and the sort of person, the sort of things that are desirable. Everybody agrees about that. So that helps. Because if morality is relative and we all thought different things, it would be chaos. If you thought it was okay to kill people and you thought it was fine you shouldn't kill people, it would be chaos. But actually we agree, partly because of our genes, partly because of these findings, we agree about the vast majority of moral values, which makes it easier. And then, of course, we've got normative ethics. Unlike Seligman, who's a very nice chap, lovely smile, philosophers tend to be a moody lot, apart from Thomas Paine at the top there, who's got a sly grin. So if you want to talk about normative ethics, for example, in schools, this is what I do, but I'm going to do it very fast. Sorry. I say, okay, this is a test of your moral intelligence, all right? A pharmacy has been broken into and somebody's stolen drugs. What do you think about it? Well, everybody says it's wrong. And in fact, I rather hope the guy will be caught and stopped from doing it again. Even a psychopath with very low moral intelligence says it's wrong and he'll be caught. Let's change the story. He breaks in because his wife's dying of cancer. The pharmacist has the drug that'll cure her. It's worth £20. He's charging £2,000. It's a story. Okay. He steals the drug, leaves £40 for the medicine, which is twice what it's worth, and he mends the window on the way out. Okay. We feel differently, don't we? We all feel differently. Our gut reaction. Firstly, we have compassion for the husband and the wife. We think the pharmacist was very unfair. He was unfair to the husband, but actually, we're a little bit worried about fairness to the pharmacist. Nobody likes to be broken into. And also, we're a little bit at the back of our mind, we can't just take the law into our own hands. I think these are our natural first impressions. And they're not bad, but we need to think about it more. So, firstly, what's best for everyone? And of course, we know what that's called, it's consequentialism. The utilitarian calculus, these are the guys who dreamed it up. A very, very important ethical position. And of course, the pharmacist has a right not to be robbed. That's human rights, and these are the guys. If you don't want to be robbed, you shouldn't rob others. The golden rule, and the golden rule has been around for a very long time. The first reference is in the hieroglyphics in Egypt, almost 2,000 years BC. And we should all obey the law. Now, this is a little bit more complicated. This sort of is deontology with Immanuel Kant. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And then this is actually quite interesting. What was in the mind of the guy who broke in? Was he stealing drugs to sell narcotics to children? Or was he actually trying to do something good and make sure the pharmacist wasn't out of pocket and the damage was repaired? So the intentions, which is called virtue ethics, this goes back to Aristotle and some modern philosophers like Lysansky. Now, the point is, it doesn't matter whether you can put names to these or say which philosopher came up with the idea. What's important is that when I mention these, you all say, oh yeah, I can see that. And you've got to take these into account to decide on how one feels about the guy breaking in. The trouble is the psychopath, you explain all this to him, he says, well, he shouldn't have broken in, it's wrong. He's not morally sophisticated like you and me. And of course, thou shalt not steal, it's a good start, but it's not exactly nuanced, and it doesn't distinguish between the two reasons somebody might break into a pharmacy. Okay, so I've done that. I haven't done the others, and they're worth looking at. Just a few words about debates. This lovely guys, they have a lovely debate. These two, it's an absolute nightmare, okay? And on the whole, I would avoid adversarial debates and do not do debates about creationism. Don't even think about it. And the reason is the creationists always win. And they'll say, look on the internet. And if you look on the internet, halfway through this debate, the scientists start jumping up and down and screaming, that's not evidence, you can't say that. They've completely lost their cool, and therefore they've lost the argument. So don't argue with creationists in public. Now, of course, I don't follow my own advice. Okay, so there's a very well-known creationist, well-known locally in Shrewsbury, who hands out leaflets in the high street. And what really galled me was he said that he could prove in young Earth creationism scientifically. So I said, we'll have a debate, but we'll set it up. The first thing was we decided what we'd debate, and that was the age of the Earth and the age of the universe. And that's what I said, and that's what he said. The next thing was he agreed he couldn't use the Bible as evidence. The next thing he agreed was that he wouldn't use the omphalos argument. You probably don't know what the omphalos argument is. The omphalos argument runs like this. When God created the universe and the Earth, he left evidence for a longer time to test our faith. Now, it's actually unanswerable. You can't disprove it. Some people call it last Thursdayism, because it is possible that God created the whole shebang last Thursday, but implanted evidence, including our memories, that it existed before Wednesday. So he wasn't going to use that. The next thing we agreed was that all evidence, scientific, peer-reviewed evidence, that we produced in the debate had to be disclosed to the other side beforehand, well beforehand, like in a court of law. And if we had counter-arguments, we had to disclose those as well. So I sent him mine. I sent him sort of about a page of things about carbon dating, background radiation and light from stars and so on. He sent me 3 or 4 pages of foolscap with no references at all, and it was just crazy stuff. And I said to him, I thought you were going to produce scientific evidence with scientific references. And he said, well, the trouble is we have this evidence, but the scientific journals won't publish it. So I said, well, you've got to stop saying, well, we won't have the debate in that case, but you've got to stop saying it's scientific. He said, no, I'm not going to. So, but that would be the way to set about doing a debate with a creationist. Oh, I referred to him as a fundamentalist. Some people say it's rude to refer to people as fundamentalists, implying they're some sort of terrorists. Fundamentalism is a very specific term, and it was coined in this year. And if you believe in those, and virtually all evangelicals do, including my next door neighbour through that wall there, he's a young Earth creationist, nice guy. They're fundamentalists. Okay. I am actually going to have an adversarial debate, again, having said you shouldn't, with my brother. It's going to be Christianity versus humanism, and it's going to be vicious. No holds barred, take no prisoners. But the difference is that I'll be talking on behalf of Christianity and he'll be talking on behalf of humanism. Do you like that? I think that's fun. It's going to be a riot. We're sort of working on it. We go on holiday for 2 weeks every year to look at churches. So we'll talk about it the next time lockdown allows us to do that. What do people remember when you give a talk? They remember the best bits and they remember the last few bits. So when I give a talk about humanism, I usually end with a bit about spirituality and the meaning of life, and obviously summary slides. So what am I going to leave you with? Oh, and I also do the common myths about humanism. Most people are religious. I explain why they're not. Humanists against religion, secular case. So these are myths that you need to dispel, and I often put that at the end as well. So what I'm going to leave you is humanism in action. It's all very well to talk the talk or just listen, but what we ought to do is actually walk. We need to do stuff, and the single most important of these things is school visitors. So please think about training as a school visitor. It's a very good training. It's actually quite fun. There's lots and lots of help from the Understanding Humanism course. There are set talks to do with PowerPoints and everything. And those of us who do it will come along with you your first time if you like. Once you get into the swing of it, it's very easy. And you can do as little or as much as you like. And it's really important. Every child goes to school should leave knowing about humanism, whether they're religious, so they'll be more tolerant towards humanism, or if they're not religious, in which case it'll be good that they know there's a name for their beliefs, even if they don't want to call themselves humanists or don't want to join. So do it. I think that's the end of my slides. So I'll stop sharing. And, hi again. Nice to see you all. So how long did I go on for? Oh, well, about an hour.
Yeah, it was just exactly an hour. Thank you, Simon. Lots and lots of things to think about and talk about there. Is that all right if I start with the first question and then we'll
sure.
Other people. So you're right at the end there. You talked about secular spirituality, and I'm just interested in how humanists talk about spirituality and what you personally mean by that.
Okay. I'm very interested in this, in a sense, because I'm a neuroscientist and it has a neuroscience correlate. Let's think. I think we all recognize that we have experiences sometimes that are qualitatively different. Let me give you an example. Supposing I look at something beautiful. The more beautiful it is, the better I feel. But sometimes I look at something, it may be a work of art, a rainbow, baby, and suddenly I feel transformed. I love not only that thing, I love the world. I see the world through rose-tinted glasses. It's a bit like being in love. Being in love is a transcendental experience. It's a very good example of one. Everything changes. And it's interesting that religious art, religious music is very good at this because it's designed to give you a tingle factor. But so is nature and so is much secular art. And it actually, we know the neural correlates and the sort of the flood of dopamine in the mesolimbic system and all that sort of thing. We know what causes it. Religious people believe these experiences come from out there somewhere. We believe they come from here. They're what's called a realist. Philosophically, we're a non-realist. And these experiences are magnificent. And some people get them more than others. Some people train themselves to get them by meditation, by taking drugs, a shorthand way to get them. Not advisable. I meditate, I get them that way. Religious people get them through prayer, through fasting, through exercise. People can get these transcendental states in a variety of ways, and they're wonderful. Greatest show on earth, and they're free. So that's what I mean by a spiritual experience. And you'll recognize them. I hope you have. If not, go and get them.
Thank you, Simon. So I'm sure there's lots of other questions. Has anybody else got any questions, thoughts about what we've just heard from Simon? Esther?
You showed us that lovely picture of yourself when you were an angry atheist.
Yes.
I think I am at that stage of being an angry atheist. So my question to you is, how do you deal with that phase? Because I've fallen out with a couple of people already because I have no tolerance. I have no patience. But then sometimes I have to stop myself and say, they don't see what I see. They don't know where I'm coming from. So, and sometimes it's a real.
I think you're halfway there. Firstly, you've learned to stop yourself on occasion. Secondly, you realize it is not very helpful. And I think it sounds like you're a little upset that you've done that. That's the most important thing, because we can change. We can lose anger, and there are many ways you can do it, but you have to want to lose anger. And the trouble is there are so many people angry and they get off on their anger. It's part of their life. They feed on it. It's the energy that keeps them going. And that's very sad, because the only person who suffers from anger is you. And there are ways of doing it. If you go on the internet to talk about helping with anger, for example, you can meditate and use metta meditation, loving kindness meditation towards people you might not like. There are other ways of coping with anger, but it is possible to change the way you think and feel. And that's actually our salvation. So many people who are tied up with baggage or depression or stress really believe that they're stuck like that forever. But we can change, but we have to want to change, and we have to do a bit of legwork. So it'll come, but you've got to work a little bit. And sometimes it's a matter of counting to 10. Somebody who's religious says something that's really stupid or ignorant or actually hurtful. You just have to pause and think, I'm not sure I want to fight this battle right now. Let's let it go. And maybe later I could come back and say, you know what you said before? It was a little harsh, you know, and they'll probably actually by then have realized it was a bit as well. And you can, but if you react to things, they're probably angry a bit as well. Everybody's too angry.
Thank you.
I remember we had some face-to-faceless training around apostasy and safeguarding, and they were talking about the people kind of losing faith and moving into a non-religious life and comparing it to coming out as gay, and it goes through the same kind of cycle of, and part of that is around kind of reforming your own identity as somebody that no longer has faith. And there are natural stages that people have to go through when anything significant happens that means that you have to reevaluate your own identity. So I think, I don't know if that's helpful, Esther, but actually it's, you know, perfectly natural and normal to be angry and to be kind of thinking about those things and recognizing that you no longer share some really fundamental things with those people who are your friends and family, and it just takes time to work through it.
You know, there's a wise word, Sarah, because when you leave a religion, you leave something that really meant something to you, a sense of community, a sense of worth, a sense of, you know, self-confidence. And then when your rug is pulled out from under you and you're starting again, it can be very different, very difficult. And that's why it's nice that you're in this humanist community, even by Zoom, and you know that people know you and like you, and you know that friends and family are part of the healing. Yeah.
Thank you. So has anybody else got any questions or had any kind of experiences of trying to talk about humanism and coming a little stuck with it, or it not going terribly well? I'm sure we've all had those ones.
I think it is worth having a little short thing you can say if somebody's, what's this humanism, you know, and have something that literally takes a couple of sentences. And certainly if you're asked on the radio or something like that, it's nice to be able to do something that you're proud of afterwards. Any of you talk on the radio? Well, think about trying to get a pause for thought or a thought for the day on your, there are lots of radio stations in Birmingham, and write to some of the producers and say, you know, listen to what they do at the moment. Listen to some of the ones, people who do it, and model it on the way they do it. And like I did, with an anecdote and a thing. And as I say, if you want to use my scripts, that's fine. You know, that's fine.
Can I say something, Sarah?
Yes.
I did some broadcasts on the World Service some time ago, and they see, you know, the sort of thought for the day they have on the World Service. They're much more open to having humanists.
Good, good,
Yeah, it was really good fun, actually.
good. Well, that's a thought, isn't it? And you get to a bigger audience, probably.
Oh, very much bigger, I think. Probably the world.
Did you approach them, or did they approach you?
I can't remember. It was I can't remember at all. It was we were all from no, there was just a group of humanists, people like Nicholas Walter and Jim Herrick, and I did it.
Oh, cool.
It was really good fun at Bush House. But yeah. So, but also there was a course that I attended at Church House, which was quite fun because everybody else were, you know, it was Church House on advice on how to take part in a discussion on radio with a group of people. It was actual practical advice that you mustn't just sit there. You've got to take every opportunity of butting in a tactful way. I just remember it was some time ago. But
That's awful. I must say, I would not like to do that. Not. I would like somebody to have a chairman who does things. I might say I was on one panel, and in fact, the one I was talking about with the Muslim, the Jew, me, the Pentecostal priest, and the Baha'i, and it was quite funny because the Muslim lady was talking a little bit about Adam and Eve, because you know Adam and Eve's in the Quran as well, and there was a pause, and I said to the students, in about 30 students, I said, you know, when one of us, you know, talks about Adam and Eve, we don't mean there really was an Adam and Eve. It's just a story, you know. It's a lovely story, but it's an allegory. And she said, no, there was an Adam and Eve. And the Jew said, yes, that's right. And the Pentecostal said, that's right. And the Baha'i and I looked at each other and raised our eyebrows. And then the tragedy was, not tragedy, it was embarrassing, really. One of the students said to us, what do we think about homosexuality? And he was quite camp. And I had lunch with him and a few others afterwards. And the Jewish person, the Muslim said it was a crime, and as such it should be punished. The Jew said it was a sin, and I chipped in with, yes, it says quite clearly that if a man lieth with a man as he would with a woman, it's an abomination and they shall be killed, as it does say in several places in the Bible. And then the Pentecostal priest was asked, and he was a lovely guy, Afro-Caribbean, very tall, dark suit, really softly spoken. And he said he had great sympathy, unlike the other two, for homosexuals, but with prayer they could be cured. So we had over that side a crime, a sin, and then a disease. Then they asked me. I tell you, it was a gift. I couldn't have really had. It was like shooting ducks in a barrel. I mean, you know, it was, and I got a standing ovation from the students, I might say. I talked a little about normative ethics. I said, how do you judge anything? You judge it on whether it's harmful. And, you know, in a free and open society, people can think and do and say what they like, as long as it doesn't cause harm. And I talked a bit about, because I'm quite interested in the sort of biology of it. And I said, you know, there's overwhelming evidence that homosexuality and homosexual behavior is no more harmful than heterosexuality and heterosexual behavior, which of course can be helpful, can be harmful, you know, prostitution, and all sorts of abuse and on those things as well. So yeah, it was very interesting. And then actually I complained to the school. I said it was crazy to have those people on a school panel. They should have, instead of a Pentecostal, you know, they are very evangelical and fundamentalist. I said you should have had a Church of England vicar. Instead of the Jew, you should have had a rabbi. Rabbis are great fun. They're usually quite funny, actually. and you know, talk in a most sensible way. And again, you shouldn't have had well, perhaps she was a typical Muslim, I don't know, but she wasn't very nuanced. You could have had better. I think it was inappropriate to put people up there that were bad representatives of their religion. I mean, as I say, it was a gift to me, but it wasn't, I didn't think it was right. Bill?
How are they bad representatives of their religion if that is the tenets that they believe and are stated in their various religious texts? Surely you'd want those people to be there versus yourself to illustrate why humanism is better.
Well, there are bad religious people and there are less bad ones. And I think you've got to really, if you're judging them, you can't judge them all by the worst examples. I mean, I know this because my brother and many of his friends are really fine people, and they would have given very good nuanced answers, including about homosexuality. And I think it's a shame that you bring in the people that are sort of lagging behind. I don't think that's, I don't think you should judge people by the worst examples. I mean, do you want to say every humanist is like Richard Dawkins? I'm not saying he's a bad person. I'm just saying I think he's atypical. Because, I mean, when I started as humanist about, I don't know, 15 years ago, a lot of people were against religion in all its forms. And they got off on their anger, actually. And that's changed. I think people now are more nuanced. We're against harm rather than religion. And we're more interested in dialogue. I hope that's the case with you. You're not all rabidly anti-religion in all its forms, are you? In all its forms?
Well, the thing is that there's a contradiction here, because if people are following a religious text and the religious text says X, and you're saying, well, there are people within that religion who actually ignore that particular part of their faith, then what exactly is it that we're saying? I mean, quite clearly that not everybody intends to fly a plane into the Twin Trade Towers. But unfortunately, within Islam, there are many people who would do that. And I'm talking a high percentage of the population would do that. Some people obviously are doctors and would go and...
So what evidence do you have that a high percentage? I mean, you're talking about what, 80% of all Muslims would do terrorist acts? Do you have evidence for that? I don't think that's true.
Yes, I do. I haven't got the references with me at the moment.
Okay, send them to me.
When they do surveys of the people, for example, when the Twin Trade Towers happened, and this is one of the reasons I joined humanism, because for the most part I thought that religion was passé, and it wasn't until this happened when I realised actually there are people who believe religious things actually would do these things. And when they've done surveys of people who within the Islamic community, we're talking something like 30%, 40% of people who were in favour of, supported, cheered it. I haven't got the information directly in front of me, but if you insist that I provide...
I insist. It's just that if you want to convince me, you'll have to send me some sort of evidence rather than... But yeah, that's fine. But, you know, I think there's some argument as to how much terrorism is actually caused by religion. It may be the fuel that amps it up. But I think most of it's political, actually.
I disagree.
I think perhaps Muslim on Muslim is more religion, but I think it's... well, again, there are a number of people. I mean, if you read Karen Armstrong, who's looked at it in some depth, I think it's more commonly political. And I think America is deemed as Satan, not because it's Christian, but because of its acts, what it's done, support for Israel, unconditional support for Israel, and think of how it feels to be same religion as the Palestinians, to think what they've, you know, the way they've treated Arabs in other countries. I mean, you only have to look at Snowden's, you know, the exposure of Snowden's, the rampant anti-Islamic sentiment.
Sounds like
I think it's a bit of both, obviously.
Simon.
In terms of being on a panel with people, though, I think it's what you said earlier, Simon, is really important, that certainly if we were speaking, we should never claim to speak on behalf of all humanists. And equally, people, of faith shouldn't claim to speak on behalf of all faiths, although they may have a strict doctrine. They're never going to reflect, the whole spectrum of belief and thought, are they? So I know it's certainly, and I speak for the Faith and Belief Forum in schools, we have to only use I statement. We cannot let, they strongly discourage any kind of statement that says we believe, or humanists believe, or Christians believe.
Yes, that's a very good point, yeah.
I really like the way you changed some of the things you used to say, like changing it to as a humanist, I believe, and these other things you said. I thought it was very, very impressive.
Oh, well, I'm learning all the time. And actually, although I've been doing dialogue with faith and interfaith groups for some years, setting up this course with Jeremy has been an eye-opener, and I've learned a huge amount. He's a lovely guy, Jeremy Riddell, and very bright and totally committed. He works incredibly hard, as a volunteer. And it's a really good course. Yeah. We did one last Sunday. We're doing it by Zoom at the moment. I
did it about a month ago. It was very good.
All right, of course you did. Of course you did. You were there. And I gave you a, I said how wonderful your, what's it called? What's that thing you ran?
Speed faithing.
Yes, speed faithing.
Yeah.
Great fun. I keep meaning, well, it's too late now because of lockdown, but I've been meaning to set that up. I think it was great fun. Do you know what, or did any of you go to the speed faithing? It was really I was very skeptical. It was a bit weird, to be honest. But almost straight away, I was completely hooked. And when the bell went, I said, no, we've only just started talking. It was so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, sadly we can't do it this year, but we were talking about radio earlier, and there's a community radio station in Birmingham called Unity FM. I don't know if anybody's ever listens to it, or if it's, my experience of it is only through work, and I suspect it's mostly listened to in Asian communities, because I think they're based in Sparkbrook. But Peter Brooks, who's the chair of the Council of Birmingham Faiths, and Mahmouda Qureshi, who was the Muslim woman that spoke at the Speed Faithing last year, if you were there, they co-host a programme on Unity FM every week around kind of community issues, really. And they did ask, they did say that, that they would like to get Humanist on there. So the offer is there.
If you do have a discussion on the radio with somebody and it's planned, try and talk to the person before. Not exactly rehearse what you're going to say, but it makes a big difference if you sort of know where they're coming from. And also, if you chat to them before, they'll like and trust you, as opposed to meeting for the first time in the studio or on the phone thing. I'll give you an example. 2 years ago, I did a debate with my next door neighbour, Peter. He's, I say, evangelical fundamentalist. And the debate was, where do we get our moral values? And we advertised it as a debate, Christianity and humanism. We publicised it widely, including on the radio, and we had 250 people turn up in a big auditorium over at the University Centre. And although it was billed as a debate, it wasn't a debate. This is what we did. We sat and chatted a little bit about where we got our moral values. And then we went away and we each wrote a 20-minute introduction. So one of us would talk for 20 minutes and the other one. And we showed each other what we were going to say. And then we slightly readjusted what we said ourselves. He talked about how he got his moral values from the Bible and from his personal relationship with God and Jesus. I was explaining earlier about, normative ethics and moral foundation theory and positive psychology. He didn't badmouth humanism. I didn't mention religion at all in my account. And my brother chaired the meeting, which was quite fun. So we did that, and then the 250 people were allowed to ask questions, and it became quite fun because they asked one of us, but the other also had a chance of saying something. It got quite lively, that actually. And then we each had 5 minutes to sum up at the end, and then my brother summed up. And it was really very nice. It was a great success, not because somebody won, although obviously I did. It, I think, anyway, so not because somebody won, but because we showed that two people of completely different worldviews, incompatible worldviews, could actually discuss something amicably and with good humor. Because at the end, I said to Peter, Peter, you know, I've listening to you, you're a very good person and you'd be a great humanist if you just gave up that God bit. And he said, at the end of it, he said, Simon, he said, you're a lovely guy. You'd be a lovely Christian. You just got to take Jesus into your heart. And we sort of gave each other a sort of male hug, you know, and it brought the place down. It was very funny. And that was because we knew each other and trusted each other. We knew what we were going to say. It was a bit of a setup, but actually it was very useful because he was able to say what he wanted. I said what I wanted. It helped that we had similar moral values, of course. But recently I've led discussions, interfaith discussions, one in live and one in Zoom, on things like prayer. So we decided at the beginning we would not discuss petitionary prayer, whether God answers prayers, but religious people are very happy with that because they see that as only a very small part of praying. And I was able to talk about my meditation and contemplation and thinking about the world and compassion for others and compassion for yourself and so on, all these different aspects of prayer in the broadest sense. And it was very, very moving how people talked about it. And a couple of Muslims talked about how important it was praying several times a day. It really made them concentrate and be a better person, in the same way that although I meditate once a day, I try and drop into meditation at odd times as well, just quickly, you know. And then we did one last week on the afterlife. Again, not discussing whether there is an afterlife, because I said nobody really knows. I can't claim to know there isn't one. I just think it's unlikely. What we talked about is the way belief in an afterlife and the form that afterlife took, how that affected how you chose to live your life on earth. Absolutely fascinating. No controversy, no bad words, some very interesting personal revelations about that. Really very interesting. Of course, you know, humanists could talk about, you know, the one life, the importance of the one life, and how liberating, in fact, it is just to have the one life, and so on. So, yeah, we had a Jew, a Baha'i, Christian, Muslim, two Christians, two humans. We only had about 8 people, but it was lovely, very interesting. On a Zoom thing, you don't want too many people. This is actually quite a nice number for a discussion.
Has anybody got any more questions for Simon before we wrap up? Tony?
Yeah, I would be interested, Simon, if you don't mind just telling us a little bit about your journey out of your devout Christian beliefs.
Yes, I will. I was doing biology, A-levels, and I'd done maths and physics, and I wanted to go to medical school, so I was doing biology rather quickly, and the biology teacher, a guy called Oleg Polunin, was telling me about DNA. I was completely blown away. And I said to him after the class, I said, excuse me, we've got to tell the chaplain about this, because he's saying, you know, an acorn growing into an oak tree is manifestation of the Godhead and the grace of the, you know. And he said, sit down. He said, we're not going to tell the chaplain because it wouldn't make any difference. What he believes is based on faith, not on evidence. And in fact, if we told him something that undermined his faith, he'd just believe even more. He'd have to. And this was a revelation, because I was believing, despite all my reservations, I was believing Christianity. And of course, people said, if I had reservations, you just got to try harder to believe. And I tried harder and I succeeded. And suddenly the scales fell away. And I realized that I'd been sort of conned. I was quite angry, really. And also there was sex, drugs and rock and roll. Which was a little, mind you, I did have a good record collection, but I didn't get any sex and drugs. I've missed out on that all my life. Anyway, so that's how I lost faith. Now, my brother did classics, and he didn't lose his faith, because there was nobody told him about DNA. And interesting enough, I was reading Dawkins, and he lost his faith learning about DNA at about the same age. Suddenly, it explains everything. It's the nail in the coffin of religion, evolution. Because before Darwin, many people were deists, not theists. They didn't believe in a personal God, but they said something must have created all this. This couldn't have happened just by chance. There must be something out there, but it's not. I don't believe in a personal God. They were deists, and many of the philosophers, great philosophers, were deists. But of course, then Darwin changed all that. He showed that in fact it did happen by chance, and that was the final nail in the coffin of deism. Isn't it fascinating, all this? I just love all this stuff.
I'm fascinated by your relationship with your brother. I think it's very...
he's a great guy. And you know, when we're on holiday together, we go to churches and we go to the services, and they're beautiful. I mean, he obviously is getting something from them that I don't, but they're fascinating. Often in a foreign language, I have no idea what they're talking, you know, chanting in Hungarian and so on. And I sit there and do a bit of meditation or maybe read a book for some of it, but it's very peaceful. And you shouldn't just look at churches on their own, you should look at them in action. The pageantry and the best of all were the Romanian Orthodox churches. Absolutely beautiful. At night, lit by 2 or 3 candles, so very slowly your eyes become accustomed to the dark. You see all this gold on the iconostasis, you know, that huge screen. And then you had all these people chanting. Absolutely beautiful. Really moving, spiritual experience.
Oh, thank you very much, Simon. It's been really interesting, and hopefully people will feel more confident to talk to people about humanism. We haven't got anything planned for Interfaith Week this year, what with it being locked down and everything, but if you've got any ideas, thoughts on something we could do.
Well, I have started something in our local interfaith group. I've persuaded them to start a climate change action group. And what we're trying to do is get a member of every single faith group, every church, every synagogue, every mosque, to send a representative to a meeting we're going to have. Anybody can come, but they need to send a representative so we know we have somebody to communicate with each group, and also they can report back. Because, you know, I mean, I think all this humanist business is, you know, very interesting and important, but it's nothing compared to the effects of climate change is going to have if we don't do something. So I thought it'd be rather fun to start up an interfaith. And there are some national interfaith organizations. And actually, there are some very good ones. My brother runs them. He's running the interfaith groups in Birmingham, Footsteps and Faith for Climate Change or something. So yeah, you join those and you get in with interfaith people and do your bit. If humanists aren't part of it, they should be. Yeah. I'll send you my brother's email address, and he's a lovely. You've met him. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. It's lovely to see you again, Simon, as always, and everybody else. I'm trying to remember when our next meeting is. We've got another one of our discussion groups. I'm looking at Karen, though she can't.
Yes, I think you're looking at me. Hang on. I'll tell you.
Can we clap on a Zoom meeting or not?
You can, yes. You have to unmute everybody if we're going to clap.
What do you mean not to?
Oh, yes. Virtual clap. Very nice.
We can do virtual clapping, yes.
We've got the Understanding Humanism meeting on the 6th of October, and then Ruth Wareham speaking on the 20th.
Oh, is she? Oh.
Yes. So for those who don't know, Ruth Wareham's the Education Campaigns Officer for Humanists UK. So she's going to come and talk about current issues around education, what Humanists UK are doing there.
I'll join you if I may. Is that okay?
Of course. Yeah.
We're sending out information to the usual mailing list, so you'll get something.
Okay, thank you, everybody. What Boris has said that we can't do. I'll see you next month. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.